And so when the new courthouse opened in 1979, we had a two-person program, which was Rick Craig and Randy Noonan. And I remember that Mr. Justice Fulton said, we need people to act as docents. Well, I'd never heard the word in my life, but he was a Rhodes Scholar, of course, and he knew that docents are people who show tour groups around museums and art galleries. And that was the sort of thought that was the genesis of what's now the Justice Education Society.
It actually was created in 1989, and at that time it was called the Law Courts Education Society. It was created, the work to begin to create it started in 1988. It started in the fall of 1988 when there was the release of an Access to Justice report by a fellow by the name of Ted Hughes, who was quite well known in British Columbia. He went around the province with a team of people, and they were trying to look at issues of public access to the justice system. And as part of that, one of the major recommendations that came out of that was that we need to do more work to educate British Columbians to understand their justice system, that there must be more opportunities for them to see it in action and to become engaged with it. And it actually started with the creation of the big law courts complex by Arthur Erickson in 1979. I was hired at that time, and they said, look, at the whole philosophy of the law courts complex downtown is to be open to the public. It's accessible justice, and it's got a big great hall, and the hall is filled with plants and light. And the idea was that, you know, we need to move away from a justice system that's very perceived as rigid and inflexible, and something that's more community and more open and more accessible. And so as part of that, they thought, well, you know, with a facility like that, there really should be programs of public education created. And so it was actually the building and the opportunities provided by the building that created the original program.
So we were faced with a twofold objective. One was to get people to come to the courthouse, and the other was to get the judges to come down and talk to them.
I have to tell you that raising the profile of the society amongst the judges was a challenge because many of the judges thought the society to be a bit of a frill in that it seemed to be entertaining students at noon hour. But once the judges started to learn about the influence, the impact, and the role of the Justice Education Society, all of the judges embraced the workings of the system.
So we had to develop resources for teachers to use in the classroom before they came to the courts. We had to then organize access programs so they could come to the courts, they'd get orientations, they'd do court watching, they'd meet with system personnel. And then the third component in the early days was the development of mock trials. And then we would organize the courts to be open for use. So we started originally with the high schools, and we would open up the courts in the evenings for 3 hours. Because, you know, if they could come into a real courtroom, and we would borrow judges' robes, and we'd get robes from the court clerks, and we got sheriff uniforms, so they could actually go into it in the way. And of course, that became very popular. That was becoming the highlight of law in the school.
The equality principles that our system espouses is particularly important, and the judges and the Law Courts Education Society, now the Justice Education Society, play a very significant and relevant role in imparting that role so that those people who come here as recent citizens and residents understand our system, and they can take part in our democracy, and therefore they become better citizens.
And it came at a very important time in two respects. Firstly, because, of course, the increasingly diverse nature of the society in BC meant that we now had large populations of people many of them from countries in which the system of justice was very, very different from our own, and who had, in many cases, a real terror of any dealings with a court or anything associated with the court, which they regarded in some cases as being an extension of the police and not necessarily police of a very nice type. And I was told that there were people on the staff of cleaning services who simply refused to go there because to be assigned to the courthouse because they feared that people were being tortured in there. It was obvious that there was a great need to go out and speak to the various cultural groups and to get them to come, adult groups as well as students, to the courthouse. This program offered a real chance over the years to ensure that in the end, at least one member of every family in the province on average would actually have been to a courthouse and actually have seen how judges conduct themselves in the courtroom and would have had an opportunity to question a judge at lunchtime. And I felt that was the best defense that we could possibly have against the misrepresentation which was commonly made of the courts and of judges at that time. Groups of judges going out to meet members of the various multicultural communities in their own settings. And we were worried about that at first because it might look as though we were taking note of people's ethnic identity, which of course is a totally irrelevant thing, or we might be thought to be categorizing people by their origin. And in the end, that concern went away entirely. And it was, these visits went off very easily. And of course, once you've gone to see people in their own setting, they're interested now in coming to see you in yours.
Well, while I was a Supreme Court judge and a Court of Appeal judge, I always felt that the public did not have an understanding of our justice system. I always felt that we have the best system in the world, in that it's the fairest system in the world, in that it gives everybody an opportunity to be heard. And our justice system is a focal point of our democracy. So I thought it was important that I take part in the Law Courts Education Society in order to assist in informing the public, and particularly our young people in schools, as to the workings of our civil and criminal justice system.
The whole learning has to be two-way. That we called it, in the original years we called it the Law Courts Education Society, and the tagline virtually was building bridges of justice. And what that was about was the fact that, you know, when you're working with the public, and this was, I think, quite important in terms of the philosophy for us, was that the idea is that we need to empower the public in order to be better educated and understand how to deal with their rights with the system. That is important, that's part of it, and that was originally very much the focus of public legal education when it started. But for those of us that worked with the system, the idea was to say, look, that's good, but if the system isn't accessible, if the rules are too complicated, if the people can't get access once they know what they have to do, because the system isn't structured in such a way that it is easily accessible and functional, then you've got a problem. And so the question was that this is really a two-way thing. Part of the thing has to be that we need the system to be understand the needs of the public better, and to structure more the needs of the public better. But at the same time, the public has to understand then how to access what's being structured.
It is not in dispute that the Aboriginal communities have not been included in the system, and that goes from policing to the courts. And I think it's particularly important that we work with the Aboriginal communities, work with the young people in the Aboriginal communities, work with youth at risk in the Aboriginal communities. And those are all the things that this society has done. And we were so good at it, in fact, that we received an international award for work that was done in the Aboriginal community. That was in 1995. In '94, we received a a similar award for work that we did in the immigration area. And those are really important roles that this organization has played.
It also has amazingly led in the end to people from other countries asking the Society to assist them in establishing similar operations in their jurisdictions. You can see how far this was from the original idea of the docent showing tour groups around the courthouse, that now the Society was involved in a big way in educating the public and in the end internationally around the world.
With the impetus of a new and architecturally innovative courthouse, the Justice Education Society was born in the 1980s with the vision of creating transparency and accessibility for the justice system in Vancouver, British Columbia. School programs, programs for First Nation and immigrant groups, brought citizens into the courthouse and the judiciary into the community. For the first time, a bridge was built between the private and inaccessible court system and a public that was often both fearful and suspicious of a system it knew little about and generally hoped to avoid. Under direction of leadership that recognized the importance of integrating all elements of the justice system, and a board of directors that represented the judiciary, lawyers, provincial government, Aboriginal and immigrant communities, and educators, the Law Courts Education Society attracted national and ultimately international interest in the quality and approach of its public legal education. For the countless students and community members who developed an understanding of the justice system and its administration as a critical element in the Canadian democratic system, the Justice Education Society has left a profound and lasting legacy.
Justice had always been, in the old days, a very cloistered institution. The public really didn't want to go into the courthouse, and judges didn't want to talk to public groups because they feared that what they said would be used for mischief. And I feel that the building of this bridge between the courts and the public in this province has been a huge accomplishment for which full credit should be given to what is now the Justice Education Society, and what started in 1979 as the Public Education Project deserves great credit for having accomplished that. And Rick was convinced, this has been his message, that it could be done, and it's the greatest tribute to him and his colleagues that their work has been so received in many other countries of the world. We don't think of ourselves in BC as world leaders, but in this matter we are.